The great forest of ironwood stood ancient and unyielding, its towering pines rising like sentinels against the blood-red sunset. Beneath their shadow, a hunting party moved with practiced silence. At their center strode Magnus Ravenclaw, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, his massive frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the fading light. His silver-streaked black hair hung loose past broad shoulders, marked with the scars of 2 centuries of battle. The hunting ritual was as old as the pack itself, dating back 1,000 years to when the first Ravenclaw claimed these lands. Magnus inhaled deeply, sorting through the forest scents with senses far keener than any ordinary wolf. The stag was close, its fear a sharp tang in the crisp autumn air. He signaled to his warriors with a subtle gesture, watching as they fanned out in perfect formation. These were his finest alphas, each deadly in their own right, yet none approaching even half the power that ran through his veins. The hunt was tradition, but for Magnus, it was something more, a fleeting respite from the burden that haunted his bloodline. The curse of the Black Flame. The words were never spoken above a whisper among the pack. The terrible rage that had afflicted every Ravenclaw alpha for 7 generations. A fury so profound it transformed even the mightiest alpha into something unrecognizable, something that blurred the line between wolf and monster. Magnus felt it even now, simmering beneath his skin like molten iron, waiting for the slightest provocation to erupt. The great stag broke from the underbrush, antlers spread wide like gnarled branches. With a silent command, Magnus unleashed his hunters. They moved as one entity, a perfect killing machine honed through centuries of tradition. Yet he held himself back, watching. Once he had reveled in the thrill of the chase, in the pure animal joy of the hunt. Now he merely observed, keeping tight control of the beast within. The last time he had fully participated in a hunt, 3 of his best warriors had died, not by the prey's hooves, but by their king's claws when the rage took him without warning. The celebration back at Ironwood Castle was subdued despite the successful hunt. Great fires burned in the massive stone hearths of the feasting hall, casting long shadows across the ancient tapestries that chronicled the Ravenclaw lineage. Warriors and their mates gathered around heavy oak tables laden with the fruits of the hunt, their laughter forced and their eyes watchful. They celebrated not the kill, but the fact that their king had returned without blood on his hands, at least not the blood of his own pack. Magnus sat upon his throne, carved from a single piece of ironwood so ancient it had turned black as night. The seat of power for the mightiest wolf pack in the north had been occupied by his line for 20 generations. 7 of those generations had been cursed. 7 generations of alphas, who began as protectors and ended as monsters that their own packs feared. He watched his people with amber eyes that reflected the firelight, seeing the tension beneath their revelry. They loved him as their king, feared him as the monster he could become, and pitied him as a man trapped by forces beyond his control. The Bloodfang pack moved south. The words came from Orion Blackthorn, Magnus's beta and oldest friend. At 250 years old, Orion was one of the few wolves old enough to remember Magnus before the curse had fully manifested. His once golden hair had faded to silver, but his eyes remained sharp as the hunting knife perpetually strapped to his thigh. Their scouts were spotted near the Widow's Pass. Magnus felt the first stirring of heat in his blood at the mention of their ancient enemies. How many? A small party, no more than 5, but where scouts travel, warriors follow. Orion's voice remained steady, but Magnus caught the subtle tension. His old friend was watching for signs of the rage. "Summon the council." Magnus rose from his throne, his massive frame towering over even his tallest warriors. "We meet at midnight." The great council chamber lay deep within the heart of Ironwood Castle, its circular walls lined with stone seats worn smooth by centuries of use. The Moonstone Council, 12 elders representing the oldest bloodlines of the pack, had gathered at their king's command. Their faces were grim in the pale light filtering through the crystal dome overhead, where the full moon cast its judgment upon their deliberations. The Bloodfang moved with purpose, Magnus stated, his deep voice echoing off ancient stone. "Their alpha, Fenris, has long coveted our territories. Now he tests our borders." "Perhaps he tests more than our borders," said Lady Morgath, her voice dry as autumn leaves. As the pack's chief healer and eldest council member, her word carried the weight of 2 centuries of wisdom. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe knot, accentuating sharp features that had once been beautiful. "Perhaps he tests you, my king." Magnus felt it then, the first flicker of rage sparking in his chest. The insinuation was clear. The Bloodfang knew of his curse, knew of the unpredictability it brought. They would seek to exploit it. "You suggest I am weak?" The words emerged as a low growl, the sound sending a visible shudder through the assembled elders. "I suggest you are vulnerable," Morgath replied, unflinching where others would have cowered. "The curse grows stronger. The treatments we provide offer less relief with each passing moon." As if summoned by her words, the heat flared within him. Magnus gripped the stone table, feeling it crack beneath his fingers. The rage was a living thing, clawing at his insides, demanding release. The council members tensed, several reaching subtly for hidden weapons. "The treatment!" Magnus forced the words through clenched teeth, fighting for control. Morgath nodded to her apprentice, who approached with measured steps, carrying a stone bowl filled with viscous green liquid. The scent hit Magnus first. Bitter herbs, moonflower, and something else. Something that had always lingered at the edge of his awareness, but never fully registered. "Drink, my king," Morgath intoned, the ritual familiar after 200 years. "Let the ancient remedy calm the beast within." Magnus took the bowl with hands that had begun to tremble. For 7 generations, the Moonstone Council had provided this remedy to the afflicted Ravenclaw alphas. It had never cured the curse, but it had made it manageable, had given him some semblance of control. Yet lately, the respite it offered grew briefer, the rage returning with greater intensity each time. He raised the bowl to his lips, then hesitated. Something stirred in the recesses of his mind, a memory perhaps, or an instinct long suppressed. The liquid seemed to shimmer strangely in the moonlight, its color shifting subtly as he watched. "My king?" Morgath prompted, a new tension in her voice. The rage chose that moment to surge, a tidal wave of burning fury that swept through his body. The bowl shattered in his grip, the green liquid splashing across the stone floor. A roar tore from his throat, primal and terrifying. The council members leapt to their feet, but it was too late. The transformation began as it always did, not the clean shift of a controlled change, but something violent and wrong. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle tore and regenerated, skin split to reveal coarse black fur erupting in uneven patches. Magnus fought it, as he always did, but the beast would not be denied. His consciousness receded, pushed aside by something ancient and vengeful. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Guards rushed in, armed with silver-tipped spears, designed specifically to subdue their king. Morgath shouted commands, her voice rising above the din. Orion alone stood his ground, centuries of loyalty warring with self-preservation. "Magnus," he called, using the name of the man rather than the title of the king. "Fight it, old friend." But the creature that lunged across the council table was no longer Magnus Ravenclaw. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of black fur and gleaming fangs. The guards formed a protective ring around the council members, their faces grim with the knowledge that many would not survive the night. This was not the first time the beast had broken free, nor would it be the last. The first guard died quickly, his throat torn out before he could raise his spear. The second managed a glancing blow before massive claws disemboweled him. The beast that had been Magnus howled in triumph, the sound shaking dust from the ancient rafters. It was not fully wolf, nor was it man. It was something caught between worlds, a monstrous amalgamation of both forms made more terrible by its wrongness. "Evacuate the castle," Orion commanded, drawing the ceremonial silver sword that marked his rank. "Get the council to safety." The beast's amber eyes fixed on Orion, a flicker of recognition passing through them before being subsumed by rage. It charged, moving with a speed that belied its massive bulk. Orion stood his ground, sword raised, prepared to die defending his king from himself. The battle spilled from the council chamber into the great hall, where the celebration had devolved into terror. Warriors scrambled to protect their mates and children, forming defensive circles as the beast rampaged through their midst. Tables splintered beneath its weight, great tapestries were torn from walls, and the air filled with the metallic scent of blood. In the kitchens below, Serafina worked by candlelight, her slender fingers methodically sorting herbs for the next day's meals. At 25, she had spent a decade in service to the castle, hidden away in its shadowed corners. As an omega without a wolf, a defect discovered in her childhood, she existed on the periphery of pack life. No mate would claim her, no children would spring from her womb. She was invisible, useful only for her skills with herbs and cooking. The first screams reached her through the stone floors, muffled but unmistakable. Serafina froze, the bundle of time suspended in her grasp. The older kitchen workers exchanged knowing glances. "The curse takes him again," whispered Marta, the head cook. Her weathered face creased with concern as she hurriedly gathered the youngest kitchen staff. "To the cellars, all of you. Bar the doors and do not emerge until morning." Serafina moved toward the cellar stairs with the others, but a tremendous crash from above halted her steps. The ceiling timbers groaned as something massive moved across the great hall floor. Dust and debris rained down, and the screams intensified. Without fully understanding why, Serafina turned away from the relative safety of the cellars, drawn instead toward the service stairs that led to the hall. "Girl!" Marta hissed. "Are you mad? The beast will tear you apart!" But Serafina continued as if pulled by an invisible thread. Something called to her, not a sound, but a feeling, a connection she could neither explain nor resist. She climbed the narrow stairs, emerging into a corridor adjacent to the great hall. The scenes that greeted her would haunt her dreams for years to come. Warriors lay broken and bleeding on the stone floor. Those still standing formed a ragged circle around the monster that prowled at their center. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, even in its hunched posture, with matted black fur covering a frame that seemed constructed of pure muscle. Its face was the most terrifying aspect, caught between wolf and human, with the elongated snout filled with razor teeth, yet with eyes that held the faintest glimmer of human awareness and suffering. Serafina pressed herself into an alcove, her heart hammering against her ribs. The scent of the beast reached her, ozone and pine, and something wild, like a lightning strike in a deep forest. It was hunting now, moving with predatory grace between the columns of the great hall, seeking new victims. A young warrior made a desperate lunge with a silver spear. The beast caught the weapon mid-thrust, snapping it like kindling before seizing the warrior and hurling him across the hall. The impact against the stone wall made a sickening sound that Serafina felt in her bones. Terror closed her throat, sent ice through her veins. She needed to run, to hide, to flee back to the kitchens. But her legs refused to move, locked in place by a fear so profound it transcended physical response. The beast turned, its nostrils flaring as it caught a new scent. Her scent, its amber eyes, burning with madness and pain, fixed directly on her hiding place. In that moment of pure, transcendent terror, something strange happened within Serafina. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Her mother's face, kind and worn, singing an ancient lullaby as she wove flowers into Serafina's hair. It was before the pack had discovered her defect, before the whispers and the pity had driven her mother to an early grave. The melody rose unbidden to her lips, a reflexive response to fear so profound it circled back to an almost preternatural calm. "The moon is a cradle, the stars are a veil," she sang, her voice barely a whisper. "Sleep now, my warrior. Let peace now prevail." The beast had begun to move toward her, its massive claws leaving gouges in the stone floor. Its growl vibrated the very air, a sound that promised death. Seraphina closed her eyes, continuing to sing the lullaby, not in hope of salvation, but as a final comfort to herself. The ancient words flowed from some deep wellspring of memory, a song far older than she realized. Blood calls to blood when the battle is done. Rest now, brave hunter, your victory won. She expected pain, expected the tearing of flesh and the breaking of bone. Instead, the growling stopped. The oppressive presence of the beast remained before her, but the attack did not come. Slowly, trembling with fear, Seraphina opened her eyes. The beast stood motionless, its massive form silhouetted against the torchlight. Its breathing came harsh and labored, like a great furnace cooling. But its eyes, those terrible amber eyes, had changed. The madness had receded, replaced by something almost like wonder. It made no move toward her, neither in aggression nor retreat. It simply watched, head slightly tilted, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. Seraphina's voice faltered, the melody dying on her lips. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity, a moment suspended between heartbeats. The remaining warriors stood frozen, their weapons half raised, disbelief etched on their blood-spattered faces. No one had ever halted the beast's rampage before. Then, with excruciating slowness, the transformation began to reverse itself. The coarse black fur receded into skin. The elongated snout shortened, the fangs retracted. Bones shifted with audible cracks, muscle and sinew rearranging themselves into human form. Where the beast had stood, Magnus Ravenclaw now knelt, naked and vulnerable, his massive body slick with sweat and blood. His silver-streaked hair hung in damp tangles around a face lined with exhaustion. His amber eyes, however, remained fixed on Seraphina. They were clear now, lucid in a way no one had witnessed in decades. He raised a trembling hand toward her, not in threat, but in something like supplication. "Your voice," he said, the words rough as if dragged across gravel. "Sing again." The command froze Seraphina in place. The Alpha King himself was addressing her, an Omega without value, invisible to all until this impossible moment. She glanced around, certain he must be speaking to someone else. But no, those penetrating eyes were fixed solely on her. "I cannot," she began, her own voice failing. "Please." The words seemed torn from him, a request from a man who had not needed to make requests in centuries. Seraphina swallowed hard, then began again, the melody tentative at first, but growing stronger with each note. "The moon is a cradle, the stars are a veil." Magnus closed his eyes, his massive frame seeming to settle, tension draining from his shoulders. The remaining warriors and council members watched in stunned silence. Orion Blackthorn approached cautiously, a heavy cloak in his hands. He draped it over his king's shoulders while keeping a wary eye on Seraphina, his expression unreadable. "What magic is this?" he murmured, too low for others to hear. Magnus opened his eyes, looking up at his oldest friend. "Not magic, truth." He rose to his feet, drawing the cloak around himself. Despite his nakedness, despite the vulnerability of his position, he emanated authority that none would question. "Bring her to the Iron Tower. Now!" Terror seized Seraphina anew. The Iron Tower was where the most dangerous prisoners were kept, where traitors met their end. Her singing had somehow stopped the beast, but had she now committed some crime? She looked around wildly, seeking escape, but guards already moved to flank her. "No harm will come to her," Magnus commanded, reading her fear. "She walks free under my protection." He fixed his gaze on the assembled council members, who had begun to emerge from hiding. "Anyone who touches her answers to me." Lady Morgath stepped forward, her face a careful mask of concern. "My king, you are unwell. Let us administer the treatment. Then we can discuss this development." "No." Magnus's refusal was absolute, brooking no argument. "No more treatments tonight. I am myself for the first time in decades." He looked again at Seraphina, his gaze intense. "Because of her, The iron tower rose from the northernmost corner of Ironwood Castle, its ancient stone blackened by centuries of exposure to the harsh elements. Despite its name, it contained no cells, no instruments of torture. It was, in fact, the private sanctuary of the Ravenclaw Alphas, a place where they could retreat when the curse threatened to overwhelm them. Its walls were reinforced with silver and rowan wood, the only materials known to contain a rampaging alpha. Its windows were narrow slits, too small for escape. It was both refuge and prison. Seraphina followed Magnus and Orion up the winding staircase, her legs weak with fear, despite the assurances of safety. The interior of the tower surprised her, not the dungeon she had imagined, but a sparsely furnished living quarter. A massive bed dominated one wall, its frame made of the same black ironwood as the throne. A simple table and chairs stood beside a fireplace where flames leapt to life at their entrance, triggered by some ancient magic. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with tomes whose spines bore titles in languages Seraphina could not read. "Leave us," Magnus commanded. Orion hesitated, concern evident in his weathered features. "Are you certain that's wise?" he asked, his eyes flicking to Seraphina. "She stopped the beast when nothing else could," Magnus replied simply. "I am safer in her presence than I have been in 2 centuries. Orion bowed slightly, though his expression remained troubled. "As you wish, my king." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "The council will have questions." "Let them question," Magnus growled. "I have endured their help long enough." When the heavy door closed behind Orion, silence descended upon the tower room. Seraphina stood rooted to the spot, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. Magnus moved to a chest near the bed, retrieving clothing, simple garments unlike the finery she had seen him wear at formal occasions. He dressed with his back to her, offering a modicum of privacy that seemed strangely considerate given the circumstances. "Your name," he said finally, turning to face her. "Seraphina, my king." Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Seraphina," he repeated, as if tasting the syllables. "You work in the kitchens." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway, surprised that he would know even that much about her existence. "How long have you been at Ironwood?" 10 years, my king, since I was 15. And in those 10 years, has no one discovered your gift?" Seraphina blinked in confusion. "Gift? I have no gift. I am—" She faltered, the words bitter on her tongue. "I am defective, an omega without a wolf." Magnus stepped closer, his massive frame making the spacious room suddenly feel small. "Is that what they told you? That you have no wolf?" A humorless laugh escaped him. "They lied." Seraphina's heart stuttered in her chest. "I don't understand." "Neither do I. Not fully." Magnus gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit, please." She obeyed automatically, perching on the edge of the seat, back straight with tension. Magnus remained standing, too restless to sit, moving instead to the narrow window where moonlight streamed in. "For 200 years I have lived with this curse," he began, his deep voice resonating in the stone chamber. "Since my 17th year, when the rage first manifested. 7 generations of Ravenclaw alphas before me suffered the same fate. Some went mad, some took their own lives. Others were killed by their own packs when the beast became too dangerous to control." Seraphina listened in silence, unsure why he was sharing this history with her, a kitchen girl of no consequence. The Moonstone Council developed a treatment, an ancient remedy passed down through the generations. It never cured the curse, but it made it manageable. It gave me moments of clarity, allowed me to rule, to protect my people. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. But lately, the treatment has been less effective. The episodes come more frequently, with greater intensity. He turned to face her, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Until tonight. Until you sang, and the beast retreated without a fight." "I don't understand how that's possible," Seraphina said softly. "It was just a lullaby my mother taught me." "Where did she learn it?" "I don't know. She said it was very old, a warrior's song from the time before the great packs formed." Magnus nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. What happened to your mother? Pain lanced through Seraphina's chest at the question. She died 12 years ago, after they discovered after they said I had no wolf. And your father? He left when I was small. I barely remember him. Magnus crossed to the table, pouring water from a silver pitcher into 2 goblets. He offered one to Seraphina, who accepted it with trembling hands. What do you know of pack history? Of Omegas? He asked. Seraphina frowned slightly. Only what everyone knows. Alphas lead, betas serve, and Omegas. She swallowed hard. Omegas bear children, keep homes, the weakest wolves. That is what we have become, Magnus said, his voice tinged with disgust. But it was not always so. He gestured to the bookshelves. The oldest texts tell a different story. In the beginning, when the first shifters emerged, the hierarchy was different. Alphas were the warriors, yes. Betas were the builders and hunters. But Omegas were the heart of the pack. Seraphina stared at him, struggling to reconcile this with everything she had been taught. They were the keepers of pack history, the healers, the connectors, Magnus continued. They possessed gifts that neither alphas nor betas could comprehend. Over time, as packs became more concerned with physical strength and territory, the Omega's gifts were forgotten, their role diminished. What does this have to do with me? Seraphina asked, finding courage from some unknown reservoir. Magnus fixed her with that penetrating amber gaze. Your song reached something in me that 2 centuries of remedies could not touch. It called to my wolf, not to silence it, but to harmonize with it. He set down his goblet and approached her, moving slowly as if afraid she might flee. I believe you are not defective, Seraphina. I believe you possess a gift so rare it has been forgotten by our kind. He knelt before her chair, bringing his face level with hers. An unthinkable posture for an alpha king. I believe you are a soul singer. The term meant nothing to Seraphina, yet it resonated within her like a truth long buried. I don't know what that means. Neither do I, not fully, Magnus admitted, but I intend to find out. He rose again, restless energy radiating from him. For tonight, you will stay here, where you are safe. Safe? Alarm flared within her. Am I in danger? Magnus's expression darkened. The council will have seen what happened. They will have questions, and some may see you as a threat to their power. He moved to the door, opening it to reveal 2 guards standing at attention outside. These men answer only to me. They will ensure no one disturbs you while I meet with the council. You're leaving? Panic edged into Seraphina's voice. The thought of being alone in this strange place was suddenly more frightening than the presence of the Alpha. Magnus paused, something softening in his stern features. I must. There are matters I need to address while my mind is clear. He hesitated, then added, I will return before dawn. You have my word. With that, he was gone, the heavy door closing behind him. Seraphina sat motionless, overwhelmed by the evening's events. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from invisible kitchen girl to what? A curiosity? A prisoner? A soul singer? Whatever that meant. She rose on unsteady legs, exploring her new surroundings. Despite Magnus's assurance of safety, she felt like a bird in a gilded cage. The tower room was comfortable but alien, filled with the personal belongings of a man who had lived for centuries. Books in ancient languages lined the shelves. Maps of territories spread across distant lands covered one table. And everywhere, evidence of a solitary existence, a king isolated by his curse. A small wooden box on the bedside table caught her attention. Intricate carvings covered its surface, wolves running beneath a full moon. Something compelled her to open it, though she knew she should not pry into the king's personal possessions. Inside lay a silver locket, tarnished with age. With trembling fingers, she opened it to reveal a miniature portrait of a woman with striking amber eyes, the same shade as Magnus's, and a lock of dark hair bound with silver thread. "His mother," came a voice from the doorway. Seraphina startled, nearly dropping the locket as she spun to face the intruder. Orion Blackthorn stood watching her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to pry," Seraphina said quickly, returning the locket to its box. "Curiosity is natural," Orion replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him, "especially when one's life has been upended so completely." He moved to the fireplace, warming his hands as if the night had chilled him. Queen Ravenna was her name. She died bringing Magnus into this world, the first victim of the curse, you might say. Seraphina remained silent, unsure of this man's intentions. As the king's beta, Orion Blackthorn was the second most powerful wolf in the territory, and potentially the most dangerous to her. "I was there when the curse first manifested in Magnus," Orion continued, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "We were young. Well, young for our kind. Barely into our second century. He was sparring with another alpha, a friendly competition. Then something changed. The shift came without warning, but it was wrong. Incomplete. Monstrous." He turned to face Seraphina, his blue eyes piercing. "I watched my friend vanish behind the eyes of a beast, the first of many times." "Why are you telling me this?" Seraphina asked softly. "Because in 200 years, I have never seen the beast retreat as it did tonight." Orion approached her, studying her face as if searching for some hidden truth. "What are you?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "The king called me a soul singer, but I don't know what that means." Orion's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition crossing his weathered features. "Soul singer," he repeated, almost to himself. "The old stories." He fell silent, lost in thought. "What old stories?" Seraphina pressed. Orion seemed to come to a decision. He moved to one of the bookshelves, running his fingers along ancient spines until he found what he sought. The tome he withdrew was bound in faded leather, its pages yellowed with extreme age. Magnus searches for answers in the council chamber, but perhaps the truth lies here. He opened the book carefully, the binding cracking with the movement. This is one of the oldest texts in our possession. It dates back to the first pack, before the great territories were established. He turned the fragile pages until he found what he sought. Here, a reference to the soul singers, omegas with the ability to commune directly with the wolf spirit, to soothe or strengthen it through song. Seraphina moved closer, peering at the faded text she could not read. "Is that what I did? Communed with his wolf?" Perhaps, but if so, it raises more questions than it answers. Orion closed the book gently. Why now, after 2 centuries of suffering? Why you, when countless healers and mages have tried to break the curse? His blue eyes narrowed slightly. And most troubling of all, why would the council have declared you wolfless if you possess such a rare gift? The implication sent a chill through Seraphina's body. "You think they knew? That they lied deliberately?" Orion's silence was answer enough. He replaced the book on the shelf, his movements deliberate. "Magnus believes the treatments have been growing less effective. I have wondered if perhaps they were never meant to cure him at all." The thought was too horrifying to contemplate. Why would they keep him cursed? He is their king. "A king they can control," Orion said grimly. "When the rage takes him, who guides the pack? The council. When his judgment is clouded by pain and fury, who makes the true decisions? The council." He moved toward the door. "And now appears an Omega, who can calm the beast with a song, who might free Magnus from their influence." They would see me as a threat, Seraphina realized, the full implications dawning on her. "Indeed." Orion paused at the doorway. "Which is why I came to warn you. Trust no one until Magnus returns, not even the guards outside. The council has ears everywhere, and Lady Morgath's influence runs deep." With that ominous warning, he departed, leaving Seraphina alone with her tumultuous thoughts. She moved to the narrow window, gazing out at the moonlit forest beyond the castle walls. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the confusion in her own heart. In the space of a single night, the invisible kitchen girl had become the center of a power struggle centuries in the making. Soul singer or not, Serafina knew one thing with certainty. By tomorrow, her life would never be the same. In the great council chamber, Magnus stood before the Moonstone Council, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. The elders had gathered hastily, their faces drawn with concern and fear. Lady Morgath occupied the central seat, her ancient hands folded calmly in her lap, despite the tension that filled the room. "You denied the treatment," she stated, her tone making it an accusation rather than an observation. "After 2 centuries of faithful service, you reject our help." "Help," Magnus repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "Is that what you've been providing all these years, Morgath? Help?" The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Never had their king addressed the chief healer with such disrespect. "The girl has addled your mind," Morgath replied, undisturbed by his tone. "A kitchen omega with a pretty voice, and suddenly you reject centuries of tradition?" "Not her voice," Magnus corrected. "Her gift. A gift your council declared non-existent when you labeled her defective." A subtle shift rippled through the assembled elders, a tensing of shoulders, an averting of eyes. It was enough to confirm his suspicions. "You knew," he said softly, the quiet more dangerous than any shout. "You knew what she was." "We knew she was different," Morgath admitted, choosing her words with care. Whether that difference was a gift or an aberration remained to be seen. It was safer for all to keep her contained. "Safer for whom?" Magnus demanded, stalking closer to the council table. "For her or for you?" Morgath's ancient eyes narrowed slightly. "For the pack, my king. Always for the pack." "The pack," Magnus echoed. "The same pack you've been slowly poisoning for generations?" A collective intake of breath followed his accusation. Morgath's composure slipped for the first time, a flicker of alarm crossing her features before the mask of serenity returned. "You speak nonsense," she said. "The fever of your curse affects your mind." "My mind is clearer than it has been in 2 centuries, Magnus countered. He placed both hands on the stone table, leaning forward to fix Morgath with an unblinking stare. "Tonight, when the beast retreated, I remembered something. A scent in your remedy that has always troubled me. Subtle, masked by the stronger herbs, but present nonetheless." He straightened, addressing the full council now. "Moon lily, known for its calming properties, yes, but also for its unique effect on alpha wolves. It doesn't just soothe the rage," his voice hardened, "it exacerbates it." Shocked murmurs ran through the chamber. Moon lily was known to be dangerous to alphas in large quantities. This knowledge was common even to kitchen herbalists. "A false accusation," Morgath declared, but uncertainty had crept into the eyes of the other council members. "The treatment has sustained you, controlled the curse." "Controlled me," Magnus corrected. "Kept me dependent on your remedies, trapped in a cycle of rage and brief clarity. Never enough peace to question, to investigate. Just enough relief to maintain my gratitude." His amber eyes blazed with a fury entirely human in its focus. "Until tonight, when a single song accomplished what your potions never could." He turned to address the full council. "Tomorrow, I will take no treatment. I will seek answers with a clear mind, with the help of the soul singer you tried to hide from me, and I will discover the truth behind this so-called curse." "This is madness," Morgath protested, rising from her seat. "Without the treatment, the beast will return with greater force. You endanger the entire pack." "Perhaps," Magnus conceded, "or perhaps I free it from centuries of deception." He straightened to his full height, every inch the Alpha King. "This council is dismissed. Return to your chambers and consider your loyalties carefully. When next we meet, I will know who stands with their king and who stands against him." The council members filed out in uneasy silence. many casting troubled glances at Morgath, whose face had hardened into a mask of cold fury. As the chamber emptied, she remained, confronting Magnus alone. "You play a dangerous game, son of Ravenna," she said, using his lineage rather than his title. "The girl has bewitched you." "The girl has awakened me," Magnus corrected. "And now I begin to see the true nature of the game you've been playing all along." Morgath's thin lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. "2 centuries you have ruled, yet you understand so little of true power." She gathered her robes, moving toward the door with the dignity of her station. "By sunrise, you will beg for the treatment. The beast always returns, Magnus. It is your nature." When she had gone, Magnus remained in the empty chamber, his thoughts churning with possibilities both hopeful and terrible. If Morgath had been poisoning him, how deep did the deception run? Was the curse itself a fabrication? Not a bloodline affliction, but a carefully maintained leash? And most troubling of all, if Seraphina could break that leash with nothing but her voice, what would Morgath do to silence her? The thought galvanized him. He strode from the chamber, intent on returning to the iron tower where Seraphina waited. The answers he sought might take time to uncover, but one thing was certain. The Omega with the forgotten gift was now under his protection. Anyone who threatened her would face not the mindless beast of before, but something far more dangerous. An Alpha King in full possession of his faculties, with 2 centuries of rage seeking direction. The night was far from over, and the game Morgath spoke of had only begun to reveal its true stakes. Dawn broke over Ironwood Castle with reluctant fingers of light that seemed to hesitate before touching the ancient stone. Seraphina stood at the tower window, her body weary from a night without sleep, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. The forest beyond the castle walls was shrouded in morning mist, ghostly pines emerging like sentinels from the white veil. She had spent the night alternating between pacing the confines of her gilded cage and peering out at the world beyond, waiting for Magnus to return, as promised. The door opened behind her with a heavy creak of iron hinges. Seraphina turned, half expecting to see Orion with more cryptic warnings. Instead, Magnus filled the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the torchlight from the stairwell. Even in simple clothing, he emanated power, not just the raw physical strength of an alpha, but something deeper, more primal. The authority of 2 centuries pressed upon him like a mantle. "You didn't sleep," he observed, closing the door behind him. "How could I?" Seraphina's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. "Yesterday I was a kitchen girl. Today I am—" She faltered, uncertain how to define her new position. "A mystery," Magnus supplied, moving to the table where a breakfast tray had been delivered earlier. He poured a goblet of water, offering it to her. "One I intend to solve." Seraphina accepted the drink, studying Magnus over its rim. The king looked different in the clear morning light, still formidable, but with a weariness around his eyes that spoke of his own sleepless night. His silver-streaked hair was pulled back from his face, accentuating strong features carved by time and hardship. "The council fears you," he said without preamble. "Or more precisely, they fear what you represent, a challenge to their control." Seraphina lowered her goblet, fear tightening her throat. "I am no challenge to anyone. I am nothing. You are everything they have tried to suppress." Magnus moved to the window, gazing out at his domain with eyes that had witnessed centuries of change. "Last night, while you sang, I remembered something, a story told to me in childhood, before the curse manifested, a legend of the first pack, when wolves and humans first merged their spirits." He turned back to face her, his amber eyes intense. In those days, the pack was balanced by 3 forces: the Alpha who protected, the Beta who provided, and the Omega who connected. The soul singers were the most revered of the Omegas, with voices that could reach the very essence of the wolf spirit. "If such Omegas were so revered, what happened to them?" Seraphina asked. Magnus's expression darkened. "Power happened. War. The great territorial disputes that shaped our current boundaries. Alphas began to value strength above all else. Betas sought position through service to the strongest alphas, and the omegas— He paused, his voice tinged with regret. The omegas were relegated to breeding and domestic duties, their gifts forgotten or deliberately suppressed. By whom? Serafina pressed, though she suspected the answer. By those who stood to gain the most from uncontrolled alpha power, Magnus replied. The early councils, the precursors to our Moonstone Council. They needed strong alphas to win territories, but feared them becoming too powerful. The Soul Singers represented a threat to that control. Serafina absorbed this information, pieces beginning to align in her mind. And you believe I am one of these Soul Singers? That my voice can somehow control your curse? Not control it, Magnus corrected. Harmonize with it. Last night when you sang, I didn't feel the beast retreat. I felt it integrate, become part of me rather than a separate entity fighting for control. He approached her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I need to understand how, and I need to know if the council deliberately hid your gift. Serafina met his gaze, a courage she hadn't known she possessed rising within her. How do we discover the truth? A ghost of a smile touched Magnus's lips. We listen where they do not expect us to hear. The servant passages of Ironwood Castle formed a labyrinth known only to those who spent their lives in invisible service. Serafina moved through them with practiced ease, her soft leather boots making no sound on the ancient stone. Behind her followed Magnus, his massive frame incongruous in these narrow corridors meant for smaller, humbler bodies. Yet he moved with surprising silence for one so large, a predator accustomed to the hunt. They emerged into a hidden alcove adjacent to the council's private chamber, where a decorative grate provided both ventilation and an unintended means of eavesdropping. Serafina had discovered this spot years ago, though she had never dared linger long enough to overhear anything of consequence. Today, however, they arrived with purpose, just as the council members were gathering for their morning session. Lady Morgath's voice carried clearly through the grate, her tone sharp with tension. The king refused treatment last night for the first time in 2 centuries. Because of the girl, came another voice. Elder Thorne, one of the younger council members at merely 120 years old. What do we know of her? She is nothing, Morgath replied dismissively. A defective Omega who should have been expelled from the pack years ago. A defective Omega who stopped the beast with a song, countered a third voice, heavy with skepticism. That hardly seems like nothing. A coincidence, Morgath insisted. The transformation was already completing its cycle. Her singing merely happened to coincide with its natural conclusion. Magnus and Serafina exchanged glances, his eyes narrowing at the obvious lie. They returned their attention to the conversation as a new voice joined the discussion, one Serafina recognized as belonging to Elder Korith, the council's historian. What if she is a soul singer? Korith asked, his tone academic rather than accusatory. The ancient texts speak of such gifts among certain Omegas. A heavy silence followed his words, broken finally by Morgath's cold laugh. Soul singers are myths, relics of a primitive time before proper pack hierarchy was established. Even if such gifts existed once, they have been bred out of our bloodlines for centuries. Deliberately? Korith pressed. The tension in the chamber was palpable even through the grate. Serafina held her breath, sensing they had reached the crux of the matter. Watch your implications, Korith, Morgath said, her voice deadly quiet. The council has always acted in the best interests of the pack. By keeping our king in a state of perpetual rage? Korith challenged. By feeding him a concoction that maintains his curse rather than curing it? A sharp crack echoed through the chamber, the sound of a hand striking flesh. Serafina flinched, imagining Morgath's bony palm connecting with Korith's weathered cheek. You forget yourself, Morgath hissed. The treatment has kept the beast contained for 7 generations of Ravenclaw alphas. Without it, they would have destroyed their own packs in their madness. Or perhaps without it, they would have discovered their true power, Korith replied, his voice steady despite the assault. A power the council has feared since the first Alpha united the great packs. Enough! Morgath's voice rang with authority. "The girl must be dealt with before she further corrupts the king's mind. Prepare a stronger dose of the treatment. Tonight, when the moon rises, we will administer it whether he consents or not. Once the beast is under control again, we will eliminate the distraction." Seraphina's blood ran cold at the casual way Morgath spoke of her elimination. Beside her, Magnus vibrated with barely contained fury, his amber eyes glowing in the dim passage. His hand found hers, squeezing with careful restraint. "We've heard enough," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Come." They retreated through the servant passages, emerging in a rarely used corridor near the castle's southern wall. Magnus led Seraphina to a small circular room she had never seen before, a space whose stone walls were covered in ancient carvings of wolves in various forms of transformation. "The first chamber," Magnus explained, noting her curious gaze, "where the original Ravenclaw Alpha performed the first controlled shift. Few know of its existence now." He paced the circumference of the room, his movements those of a predator in a cage too small to contain his energy. "The Council has been poisoning my line for generations. The curse is no curse at all. It is a leash, a means of control." "But why maintain the rage?" Seraphina asked. "Surely a calm alpha would be easier to influence than one consumed by fury." "Not if that calm revealed the full extent of our power." Magnus stopped before a particular carving, a wolf with a human's eyes, surrounded by smaller figures in postures of supplication. "The Ravenclaw Alphas have always been stronger than others. The first of our line could shift not just his form but his essence, accessing depths of the wolf spirit that others could only glimpse." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "I believe the Council fears what would happen if a Ravenclaw Alpha achieved full integration with his wolf. They have deliberately kept us fractured, divided against ourselves, powerful enough to protect the territory, but too unstable to question their authority." Seraphina considered this, the implications staggering. "And my role in this? Why would they declare me defective?" Magnus moved closer, studying her face as if searching for something hidden beneath her skin. "Your mother. You said she taught you the song, that she died after they discovered your supposed defect. Was her death natural?" The question struck Seraphina like a physical blow. She had never considered any alternative, yet now doubt bloomed like a poisonous flower. "They said it was a wasting sickness. She grew weaker over months until she was no longer a threat," Magnus finished grimly. "Just as they now see you as a threat. A soul singer who could help an alpha integrate with his wolf, who could break centuries of control." Tears welled in Seraphina's eyes as understanding dawned. "They killed her because of what she was, what I am." Magnus nodded, his expression softening with compassion. "I believe so, and they will attempt to do the same to you unless we act first." Seraphina wiped away her tears, grief transforming into resolve. "What must we do?" "First, we confirm our suspicions." Magnus moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a small recess containing a crystal vial of green liquid. "This is the last dose of treatment I was given. We need to know exactly what it contains." "I know someone who can help," Seraphina said. "Marta, the head cook. She was trained as an herbalist before coming to the kitchens. She can identify any plant-based substance by scent alone." "Can she be trusted?" Seraphina hesitated only briefly. "She has no love for the Council. They took her son for the border guards 20 years ago. He never returned." Magnus nodded. "Go to her, but discreetly. Trust no one else. Return here by midday with whatever information she can provide." As Seraphina turned to leave, Magnus caught her hand. "Be careful," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that sent a shiver through her body. "You are no longer invisible, little singer." The weight of his concern followed her through the castle corridors as she made her way to the kitchens, keeping to the servant passages where her presence would draw no attention. The morning meal preparations were in full swing when she arrived, the air thick with the scents of baking bread and roasting meat. Marta stood at the central table, her weathered hands deftly shaping dough with practiced movements. The older woman looked up as Serafina entered, her eyes widening in surprise. "By the moon," she breathed. "We thought you dead, girl." "Dead?" Serafina echoed, confused. "Or worse," Marta replied, quickly ushering Serafina into the small herb pantry adjacent to the main kitchen. "When the king took you, and you didn't return," she left the implication hanging. "I need your help," Serafina said, withdrawing the crystal vial from the folds of her dress. "I need to know what's in this." Marta took the vial with a frown, uncorking it and wafting the scent toward her nose. Her expression darkened as she identified the components. "Moon lily," she began, "wolf's bane, thorn apple, red mushroom, all powerful herbs, but combined." She looked up sharply. "This is poison, girl. Slow acting, designed to weaken over time rather than kill outright. But the moon lily and wolf's bane especially. They're known to induce rage in alphas." "I feared as much," Serafina replied, taking back the vial. "Marta, what do you know of soul singers?" The older woman's face went pale. She glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer. "Where did you hear that term?" she whispered. "From the king. He believes I may be one." Marta studied her face, seeming to see something new in features she had known for a decade. "My grandmother spoke of them," she said finally. Omegas with voices that could touch the wolf directly, bypass the human mind entirely. They were revered once, vital to the pack structure. Her voice lowered further. She claimed they were systematically eliminated centuries ago when the councils rose to power. "Eliminated," Serafina repeated. "Like my mother?" Pain flashed across Marta's face. "Elara was my friend," she said. "I never believed her illness was natural. It came too suddenly, progressed too perfectly." She gripped Serafina's hands. "She made me promise to watch over you. I should have realized sooner what you were, what she was." "You knew my mother had the gift?" Marta nodded. "I heard her sing once, during a winter festival. The entire pack fell silent. Even the most aggressive alphas grew calm, their eyes losing that wild edge they carry. The next day, the council confined her to the women's quarters, forbade her from singing in public again." She squeezed Serafina's hands. "A month later, she met your father. 6 months after that, you were born." "My father," Serafina whispered. "Who was he?" Marta's expression turned guarded. "That is not my secret to share, child, but know this. You come from stronger blood than you realize." She released Serafina's hands and moved toward a small chest in the corner of the pantry. From it, she withdrew a leather-bound book, its cover worn with age. "This was your mother's, her personal grimoire of songs and herb lore. She left it in my keeping before she died, meant for you when the time was right." Serafina accepted the book with trembling hands. "Why didn't you give it to me before?" "The council watches," Marta said simply, "and until now you had no need of it. But things have changed, haven't they? The king has seen what you are." Serafina nodded, clutching the book to her chest. "The council means to eliminate me, as they did my mother." "Then you must be stronger than she was," Marta replied, her voice hardening with resolve. "You must sing not just for the king, but for yourself." Serafina left the kitchens with her mother's grimoire hidden beneath her dress, the knowledge of the poison treatment weighing heavily on her mind. She made her way back toward the first chamber where Magnus awaited, but as she rounded a corner in the service corridor, a hand shot out from an alcove, seizing her arm in a bruising grip. She found herself face to face with Carrick, captain of the castle guard, and Morgath's nephew. His cold eyes bored into hers, his thin lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. "The council wishes to speak with you, Omega," he said, his tone making the designation an insult. "I have business with the king," Serafina replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The king is indisposed," Carrick countered smoothly. "Preparing for the border patrol. You will come with me now." Fear bloomed in Serafina's chest. If Carrick delivered her to Morgath, she would never leave the council chambers alive. She needed to stall, to find a way to alert Magnus or Orion. "I need to return something to the kitchens first," she said, reaching for any excuse. "Now!" Carrick's grip tightened painfully. "Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Desperate, Serafina did the only thing she could think of. She opened her mouth and sang. Not the gentle lullaby that had calmed Magnus, but something new, something that rose from deep within her, guided by instinct rather than knowledge. A high, piercing note that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the castle. Carrick's face contorted in pain. He released her arm, clapping his hands over his ears. "Stop!" he commanded. But Serafina continued, the note modulating, becoming something almost physical in its intensity. Blood began to trickle from Carrick's nose. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious but alive. Serafina cut off the sound abruptly, shocked at the power that had flowed through her. This was not the gentle communion of the lullaby. This was a weapon, a direct assault on the wolf consciousness. Shaken, she fled toward the first chamber, no longer caring if anyone saw her. She burst through the door, startling Magnus, who had been studying the ancient carvings. "What happened?" he demanded, noting her disheveled appearance and the fear in her eyes. "The captain tried to take me to the council," she gasped, still breathless from her flight and the unexpected use of her gift. "I sang, but not like before. I hurt him." Magnus's expression darkened. "They move against us sooner than I expected." He took the vial from her trembling hand. "Did Marta confirm our suspicions?" Serafina nodded. "It's poison, designed to induce rage while weakening you over time." She withdrew her mother's grimoire from beneath her dress. "And I found something else, my mother's book. Marta said she was like me, a soul singer. The council confined her after hearing her sing at a festival. Then later—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "They killed her," Magnus supplied grimly, "as they will try to kill you." "There's more," Serafina said, opening the book to reveal pages of handwritten notes in a script similar to her own. "Marta knew my mother well. She implied that my father was someone important, someone whose identity was kept secret." Magnus took the book, his amber eyes scanning the pages with growing intensity. "These songs," he murmured, "they're ancient, ritual songs from the first pack." He looked up sharply. "Your mother had access to knowledge that has been suppressed for centuries." A heavy knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Magnus pushed Serafina behind him protectively as the door swung open to reveal Orion, his weathered face grave. "The council has called an emergency session," he reported. "They claim the king is unwell and requires immediate treatment. They've summoned the castle guard to ensure compliance." Magnus cursed under his breath. "They moved to seize control while I'm supposedly weakened without their poison." He turned to Serafina. "They will come for you as well." "We could flee," Orion suggested. "The Northern Hunting Lodge is defensible, loyal to you alone." "No," Magnus replied firmly. "If we run, we concede that they have the right to control the throne. This ends today." He fixed his gaze on Serafina. "But I will not risk you in the confrontation to come." "I will not hide," Serafina said, a new strength in her voice. "If I am what you believe, what my mother was, then my place is at your side." Magnus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But first, we must understand the full extent of your gift." He gestured to the grimoire. "Your mother's knowledge may be the key to unlocking both your power and my true nature." Together they pored over the ancient songs transcribed in Alara's careful hand. Notes in the margins explained their purposes: songs to heal, to strengthen, to calm. And on the final page, written in a different ink as if added later, a song unlike the others, a song of integration. "The binding song," Serafina read aloud, "to unite the divided spirit, to make whole what has been sundered." "The exact opposite of what the council's poison has been doing to me for centuries," Magnus said. "They have kept my human and wolf natures at war, each fighting for dominance. This song could help me integrate them fully." "It requires blood," Serafina noted, reading further. "The blood of the singer and the alpha mingled under moonlight." "A blood bond," Orion commented from where he stood watch at the door. "The most ancient and powerful form of pack magic." forbidden by council decree for 500 years. Magnus laughed without humor. Of course they would forbid it. Such a bond would be beyond their control. He turned to Serafina, his expression intensely serious. This is no small thing. A blood bond cannot be broken except by death. It would link us in ways neither of us fully understands. Serafina should have been terrified by the prospect. Just days ago, she had been a nameless kitchen girl, invisible and insignificant. Now she stood on the precipice of binding herself irrevocably to the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Yet fear was not what she felt. Something deeper, more primal called to her, the same instinct that had guided her song against Carrick. "I will do it," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for you, but for my mother, for all the soul singers they silenced." Magnus nodded, respect kindling in his amber eyes. "Tonight, then, when the moon rises." He turned to Orion. "We need time. Can you delay the council?" The old beta smiled grimly. "I've been managing council politics since before most of them were born. I will keep them occupied until nightfall." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Magnus, if you succeed, if you truly integrate with your wolf, you will become something not seen since the first alpha. The council fears this for good reason." "I know," Magnus replied. "But the time for half measures has passed. The Bloodfang move against our borders, and our own council plots against the throne. The pack needs its true alpha, not a caged beast they can control." As Orion departed to execute his delaying tactics, Magnus and Serafina continued to study the grimoire, preparing for the ritual to come. Time slipped away as they absorbed the ancient knowledge, their heads bent close together over the yellowed pages. Neither noticed how naturally they had begun to move in concert, how their breathing had synchronized, how the space between them had shrunk until their shoulders touched. The first warning came as shadows lengthened across the floor of the first chamber. A distant commotion echoed through the castle, shouts and the clash of weapons. "They've discovered Carrick," Serafina guessed, closing the grimoire. "They'll be coming for us." "Then we accelerate our timeline," Magnus decided, moving toward the door. "We must reach the sacred grove before they find us." "The sacred grove?" Serafina echoed. "I've never heard of such a place." "Few have," Magnus replied. "It lies at the heart of the Ironwood forest, protected by magic older than the castle itself. It's where the first shift occurred, where the original bond between human and wolf was forged." He took her hand, his touch sending a current of warmth up her arm. "It's our best chance for the ritual to succeed." They slipped from the first chamber into a passage Serafina had never seen before, a narrow tunnel that descended deep beneath the castle foundations. The air grew colder, damper as they proceeded, the only illumination coming from phosphorescent lichen that clung to the ancient stone walls. "These passages predate the castle," Magnus explained as they hurried forward. "They were created by the first pack as escape routes, forgotten by all but the Ravenclaw alphas who passed the knowledge from one generation to the next." The tunnel eventually opened into a natural cavern where an underground river flowed swift and silent. A small boat was moored to a jutting rock, its wood as black as the surrounding darkness. "The river flows beneath the Ironwood forest," Magnus said, helping Serafina into the boat. "It will carry us directly to the sacred grove." As they pushed off from the mooring, the boat seemed to know its own course, requiring no guidance as it followed the swift current. Serafina trailed her fingers in the icy water, marveling at the luminescent fish that darted beneath the surface, their scales glowing with an inner light that illuminated the cavern walls. Overhead, crystal formations reflected and amplified the light, creating a subterranean sky of cold stars. "It's beautiful," she whispered, afraid to break the sacred silence of the place. "The old magic runs strong here," Magnus replied, his voice equally hushed, far from the council's influence. They traveled in comfortable silence for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time seemed to flow differently in this ancient place. Eventually, the river widened into a pool where the boat came to a natural stop at a stone landing. Beyond, a staircase carved directly into the living rock ascended into darkness. "We climb now," Magnus said, helping Serafina from the boat. "The grove lies just above." The staircase spiraled upward, each step marked with carvings of wolves in various poses, hunting, running, howling at an unseen moon. As they climbed, Serafina felt a strange sensation building in her chest. A pressure, not uncomfortable, but intense, as if something long dormant was stirring to life. "I feel it too," Magnus said, noting her hand pressed against her sternum. "The old power awakens." They emerged finally into the heart of the sacred grove, a perfect circle of ancient ironwood trees whose massive trunks and intertwined canopy created a natural cathedral. The ground was carpeted with silver moss that glowed softly in the gathering twilight. At the center stood a stone altar, weathered by countless centuries, yet still bearing the claw marks of the first alpha. "We've arrived just in time," Magnus observed, glancing at the darkening sky, visible through gaps in the canopy. "The moon rises." As if summoned by his words, the first silver rays of moonlight pierced the leafy ceiling, falling directly upon the altar stone. The moss beneath their feet seemed to pulse in response, the glow intensifying to cast the grove in ethereal light. "Your mother's grimoire," Magnus prompted. "What does it say of the ritual?" Serafina withdrew the book from her dress, opening it to the final page. "We must stand on opposite sides of the altar," she read. "As the moon reaches its zenith, we each make a cut across our palm, then press our bleeding hands together upon the stone." "And the song?" Serafina studied the notation carefully. "It's complex, unlike anything I've sung before. The words are in the old tongue." "Can you read them?" "Yes," she replied, surprising herself. "Somehow I understand them." They took their positions as the grimoire instructed, facing each other across the ancient altar. The moonlight strengthened as the celestial body rose higher, bathing them both in silver radiance. Serafina could feel her heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. This moment felt inevitable, as if her entire life had been leading her to this sacred space, to this man, to this ancient magic. "It's time," Magnus said, as the moon reached its zenith, its light concentrating on the altar between them. With steady hands, he drew a dagger from his belt. Not steel, but obsidian, its blade reflecting nothing of the moonlight that fell upon it. He drew it across his palm first, his expression unchanging as blood welled from the wound, darker than human blood, almost black in the strange light. He offered the dagger to Serafina. She took it without hesitation, making a similar cut across her own palm. The pain was sharp but clean, oddly satisfying. Her blood appeared normal at first, then seemed to shimmer with tiny points of light, like stars caught in a crimson sky. "Now the song," Magnus prompted, extending his bleeding hand toward her. Serafina began to sing, the ancient words flowing from her lips as naturally as breath. The melody was unlike her mother's lullaby, deeper, more primal, seeming to resonate with the very earth beneath their feet. As the song grew in strength, she placed her bleeding palm against Magnus's, their fingers intertwining over the altar stone. The moment their blood mingled, a shockwave of power surged through them both. Serafina gasped, but did not stop singing, even as the world around them seemed to dissolve. Visions flashed through her mind. Wolves running beneath a full moon, the first human to accept the wolf spirit into his soul, generations of alphas fighting against the growing corruption of the councils. Magnus's experience was different, but no less profound. For the first time in 2 centuries, he felt his wolf not as a separate entity fighting for control, but as an integral part of himself. The rage that had defined his existence for so long transformed, becoming focused purpose, controlled power, the fractured pieces of his psyche knit together, healing wounds he had carried so long he had forgotten they existed. The moss beneath their feet erupted in blue flame that cast no heat, spiraling upward around them in a vortex of ancient magic. The trees of the grove seemed to lean inward, witnessing and blessing the bond being forged. And through it all, Seraphina's voice held steady, the song reaching its crescendo as the final words called for the completion of the ritual. What was broken now is whole. What was divided, now united. By blood and song, by moon and stone, the bond is sealed until death claims us both. As the final note faded, the blue flames vanished, plunging the grove into momentary darkness before the normal moonlight reasserted itself. Seraphina swayed on her feet, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Magnus was around the altar in an instant, catching her before she could fall. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it true despite her fatigue. "I feel different, complete, somehow." Magnus nodded, understanding in his amber eyes. "The bond has taken hold. I can feel you here." He pressed his healed palm to his chest. "A presence, separate from me, yet connected." Seraphina realized she felt the same, a warm awareness of Magnus that had nothing to do with his physical proximity. More than that, she felt a new strength flowing through her veins, as if the ritual had awakened something dormant within her own being. "Your eyes," Magnus said softly, studying her face with wonder. "They've changed." "Changed how?" Seraphina asked, alarmed. "They were brown before. Now they're amber, like mine." Before Seraphina could process this transformation, a distant howl broke the silence of the grove. Not the call of a natural wolf, but the battle cry of a shifter in wolf form. It was followed by another, then another, until the night air filled with a chorus of howls approaching from the direction of the castle. "The council has sent hunters," Magnus growled, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through Seraphina's bones. "They will not defile this sacred place." He stepped away from her, and for a moment Seraphina feared the rage would take him again. But what happened next was something entirely new. Magnus's transformation began, but unlike the violent, painful process she had witnessed before, this shift was fluid, natural. His body flowed from human to wolf form in seconds, without the hybrid stage that had marked his previous changes. The wolf that stood before her was enormous, its shoulder reaching her chest, its coat black as midnight with silver streaking the fur around its massive head. Its amber eyes were fully conscious, fully Magnus, with no trace of mindless rage. The beast and the man were one at last. Seraphina reached out hesitantly, burying her fingers in the thick fur of his neck. The connection between them flared at the contact, allowing her to feel what he felt, the exhilaration of the complete shift, the perfect integration of human intelligence and lupine instinct. More howls sounded, closer now. Magnus turned toward the sound, his massive body tensing for combat. Through their bond, Seraphina felt his protective instinct, his determination to keep her safe at any cost. "No," she said firmly, stepping to stand beside him. "We face them together. That's what the bond means." Magnus's wolf form regarded her for a long moment, then inclined its great head in what could only be described as a nod of respect. He moved toward the edge of the grove where the hunting party would emerge, Seraphina following close behind. They did not have long to wait. Torches appeared through the trees, carried by warriors in partial shift, their bodies mostly human, but with claws extended and features sharpened to reveal their wolf nature. At their head strode Carrick, a livid bruise darkening his temple, where he had struck the ground after Seraphina's sonic attack. "By order of the Moonstone Council," he called, his voice carrying through the sacred space, "the Omega known as Seraphina is to be detained for questioning regarding treasonous activities against the pack." Magnus snarled, the sound sending several of the younger warriors stumbling backward in fear. Even in full wolf form, his dominance was absolute, his alpha presence a tangible force that pressed against the intruders. "The king accompanies her," Carrick continued, his voice less certain. "He is to be escorted to the healing chambers for treatment of his affliction." Seraphina stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Magnus's massive shoulder. "Your king needs no treatment," she announced, her voice carrying a new authority that surprised even her. The curse you claim to treat is no curse at all, but a poison administered by the council to control him." Whispers broke out among the warriors, many looking to Carrick for guidance. The captain's face hardened with anger. "More treason," he spat. "The Omega bewitches both king and pack. Take her." Two warriors lunged forward on his command, but halted abruptly as Seraphina began to sing. Not the binding song this time, but a new melody that seemed to flow through her without conscious thought. It was a song of truth, compelling honesty from those who heard it. The advancing warriors froze, confusion spreading across their features as the magic took hold. "What is the true purpose of the king's treatment?" Seraphina asked, weaving the question into her song. "Control," answered one warrior, his eyes wide with surprise at his own honesty. "The council speaks of containing the curse, but they seek to maintain their power over the throne." "Has the council ever sought a true cure?" "No," replied another, the compulsion to truth overpowering his loyalty to Carrick. "They fear what the king would become if fully healed." Carrick snarled, lunging toward Seraphina with claws extended. "Silence, witch!" Before he could reach her, Magnus intercepted him with blinding speed, his massive wolf form knocking the captain to the ground. Carrick fought back with the desperation of a cornered animal, his partial shift allowing him human dexterity with wolf strength. It was not enough. Magnus moved with a fluid grace that belied his size, each attack precisely calculated, his strategy both human and wolf, in perfect balance. The fight ended quickly. Carrick lay pinned beneath Magnus's massive paws, the alpha's jaws positioned at his throat, not breaking the skin, but making the threat clear. The captain went limp in submission, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "The king has integrated with his wolf," Seraphina explained to the watching warriors. "He is neither beast nor man, but both in harmony. This is what the council has feared for centuries, an alpha beyond their control." She continued to sing, the melody shifting to one of revelation, allowing the warriors to see the truth with their own eyes. Magnus released Carrick and padded back to Seraphina's side, his transformation reversing as smoothly as it had begun. Within moments he stood in human form again, his clothing somehow intact despite the shift. "I am Magnus Ravenclaw," he declared, his voice carrying the full weight of 2 centuries of rule. "True alpha of the Northern Territories, freed from the council's poison by the gift of a soul singer they sought to silence." He extended his hand to Seraphina, who took it without hesitation. "This Omega is Seraphina, daughter of Alara, last of the soul singers before her. Through blood and song, she is bound to me and I to her. By ancient law, she stands as my equal, my queen." Shocked murmurs ran through the gathered warriors. An Omega as queen was unprecedented, a direct challenge to centuries of hierarchy. Yet none could deny what they had witnessed: the king's perfect shift, the power of Seraphina's song, the undeniable bond between them. One by one, beginning with the oldest among them, the warriors knelt in acknowledgement of the pair before them. All except Carrick, who remained on the ground where Magnus had left him, his face contorted with hatred. "The council will not accept this," he snarled. "An Omega queen? It defies all tradition, all law." "The council no longer dictates law to me," Magnus replied coldly. "Their treachery ends tonight." He turned to address the kneeling warriors. "Return to the castle. Inform the Moonstone Council that their king returns at dawn, with his queen beside him. Any who oppose us will be judged not by council decree, but by pack law, the ancient law that predates their corrupted authority." As the warriors departed, many casting wondering glances back at the unlikely pair, Magnus turned to Seraphina. In the silver moonlight, with her newly amber eyes and the power of their bond humming between them, she looked nothing like the kitchen girl she had been just days ago. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the steel beneath it. "The council will not surrender their power easily. There will be challenge, perhaps even bloodshed." Seraphina thought of her mother, of the gift that had been denied her, of the life that had been stolen. She thought of Magnus, suffering for centuries under the council's poison. She thought of all the Omegas relegated to subservience, their potential gifts suppressed by a hierarchy built on fear rather than balance. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady with newfound purpose. "They silenced my mother's song. They will not silence mine." Magnus smiled then, a rare expression that transformed his stern features, making him appear younger, unburdened by the weight of his long years. "Then let us reclaim our pack, my queen. Let us restore what was broken." Hand in hand, they began the walk back to Ironwood Castle, leaving the sacred grove behind, but carrying its ancient magic within them. The bond between them pulsed with shared strength, a connection that transcended the conventional understanding of Alpha and Omega. Together, they would face the Council's wrath, the challenges of tradition, and the threat of the approaching Bloodfang Pack. For the first time in centuries, the true Alpha of the Northern Territories walked in full possession of his power, and at his side, a queen with a song that could reshape the world. Dawn broke over Ironwood Castle with ribbons of crimson and gold that seemed to set the ancient stone ablaze. From the edge of the forest, Magnus and Seraphina gazed upon the fortress that had stood for 1,000 years, its towers reaching toward the sky like the claws of some great beast. The morning mist clung to the lower walls, creating the illusion that the castle floated among clouds, suspended between earth and heaven. "It looks different somehow," Seraphina observed, her newly amber eyes reflecting the rising sun. "You are seeing it with new eyes," Magnus replied, his deep voice resonant in the morning stillness. "The bond changes more than just our connection to each other. It alters how we perceive the world." The bond hummed between them, a constant awareness that transcended physical proximity. Seraphina could sense Magnus's determination, his righteous anger at centuries of deception, and beneath it all, a profound weariness that came from bearing the weight of rule for more than 200 years. In turn, she knew he could feel her uncertainty, her courage in the face of it, and her fierce desire for justice for her mother and all those the council had silenced. "They will be waiting," she said, her gaze fixed on the castle gates. "Morgath will have prepared for our return." "Let her prepare," Magnus growled, his amber eyes flashing with barely contained power. "No amount of council scheming can stand against what we have become." Together they approached the massive ironwood gates that had not been closed in peacetime for generations. Today they stood sealed, a clear statement of the council's position. Guards lined the battlements above, their expressions grim as they watched their king and his unlikely queen approach. "Open the gates for your king," Magnus commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a single figure appeared atop the central tower, the rising sun at his back casting his face in shadow. Orion Blackthorn's voice rang out across the courtyard. "The council demands proof that you come of your own will, my king, and not under the enchantment of the Omega." Seraphina felt Magnus's anger flare through their bond, hot and immediate. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, a silent reminder that confrontation was not their only option. Understanding passed between them without words, one of the many gifts of their newfound connection. "I will give them proof," Magnus said, his voice calm, but carrying the promise of steel. With deliberate movements, he began to shift. Unlike the violent, painful transformations of the past, this change flowed like water. His form shimmered in the morning light as human gave way to wolf with graceful precision. The massive black wolf that stood in his place was magnificent, power radiating from every line of its body. This was no mindless beast, but an alpha in his prime, in perfect control. Gasps sounded from the battlements. The curse that had afflicted Magnus for 2 centuries was known to prevent clean shifts, to trap him in a monstrous half-form that was neither fully human nor fully wolf. Yet here he stood, a perfect specimen of lupine majesty, his amber eyes gleaming with human intelligence. "The king has mastered the curse!" someone shouted from the walls. "It is a miracle!" Orion's voice cut through the growing murmurs. "Open the gates! Let them enter!" Slowly the massive gates swung inward, revealing the main courtyard beyond. A delegation waited there, not the guard Serafina had expected, but ordinary pack members, servants and craftspeople who had heard of the king's transformation. They lined the path to the main keep, their faces a mixture of awe, hope, and trepidation. Magnus shifted back to human form as smoothly as he had changed, his clothing somehow intact despite the transformation, another benefit of the perfect integration. He took Serafina's hand, and together they walked the gauntlet of staring eyes, heads held high. "Is it true?" a voice called from the crowd. "Has the king truly conquered the curse?" "There was no curse," Serafina replied, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed courtyard. "Only poison, administered by those who claimed to heal." Shocked whispers spread through the gathering. An elderly beta male stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "My daughter serves in the healing chambers. She has prepared the king's treatment for 30 years, believing it to be medicine. Are you saying she has been party to treason?" Magnus addressed the old man directly, his tone softening. "Many have been deceived, Elder Thorn. The blame lies not with those who acted in good faith, but with the council that orchestrated the deception." This acknowledgement seemed to ease some of the tension in the crowd. As they continued toward the keep, Serafina noticed faces becoming more welcoming, several people bowing their heads respectfully as they passed. Word of their bond had spread faster than she had anticipated. Orion met them at the entrance to the great hall, his face lined with worry despite the relief evident in his eyes at seeing them both safe. "The council awaits in the Chamber of Ancients," he said without preamble. "They have invoked emergency protocol, claiming you are bewitched by forbidden magic." "The blood bond," Magnus surmised. "They felt it." Orion nodded. "The old magic registers with those sensitive to such things. Morgath was disturbed when it happened. She has gathered every elder loyal to her." "And those not loyal?" Serafina asked. "Korith stands with you, as do 2 others. The rest follow Morgath, either from conviction or fear." Magnus squared his shoulders, his massive frame seeming to grow even larger as he focused his resolve. "Then we face them now, before they can consolidate their position further." The Chamber of Ancients lay at the heart of Ironwood Castle, predating even the fortress itself. It was said the first Alpha had conducted the rituals that united human and wolf within its circular walls. Ancient beyond reckoning, it served as the most sacred meeting place, reserved for matters that would shape the future of the pack for generations to come. When Magnus pushed open the heavy stone doors, the sight that greeted them was one of solemn pageantry. The 12 members of the Moonstone Council sat in a semicircle, each upon a throne carved from a different sacred wood, each wearing the ceremonial silver circlet that denoted their station. At their center, elevated slightly above the others, sat Lady Morgath, her ancient face a mask of stern disapproval. "Magnus Ravenclaw," she intoned, using his name rather than his title, a deliberate slight. "You come before this council accused of violating our most sacred laws. You have formed a blood bond with an Omega, a union forbidden for 500 years. You have rejected the treatment that has maintained pack stability for 7 generations. You have brought an unproven female into our most sacred spaces." Her cold eyes fixed on Serafina with undisguised contempt. "How do you answer these charges?" Magnus moved to the center of the chamber, his presence filling the space with barely contained power. Serafina felt his rage building through their bond, but also his control, his strategic mind assessing the situation before responding. "I reject your authority to bring charges against your king," he said, his voice calm but resonant with centuries of command. "For 200 years I have suffered under what you called a curse. What you claimed was my burden to bear as a Ravenclaw Alpha. I accepted your treatments, your counsel, your supposed wisdom." His amber eyes swept the assembled elders, lingering on those who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Now I know the truth. The treatment was no cure but a poison, designed to keep me weakened, divided against myself, dependent on your guidance." Murmurs broke out among the younger council members, but Morgath remained impassive, her ancient fingers curled around the arms of her throne like the talons of a predatory bird. "Baseless accusations," she said dismissively. "The treatment has been administered to Ravenclaw alphas for generations, formulated by our most skilled healers." "Then you will have no objection to having it tested," Magnus countered, producing the crystal vial he had kept from his last dose. "Let Korith, with his knowledge of ancient herbs, examine its contents before the full council." Morgath's eyes narrowed fractionally, the first sign of unease she had displayed. "There is no need for such theatrics. The composition of the treatment is a sacred trust, known only to the head healer." "Convenient," Magnus observed. "Almost as convenient as declaring a gifted Omega to be wolfless when her abilities might threaten council control." At this, Elder Korith stood from his place in the semicircle, his weathered face grave beneath a shock of white hair. "The king speaks truth that cannot be ignored. I have examined the records of Omega births for the past 3 centuries. In every generation, certain Omegas were declared defective and removed from pack succession. In every case, these individuals shared certain traits that align with ancient descriptions of soul singers." "Superstition and folklore," Morgath snapped. "The council deals in reality, not children's tales." "Reality?" Seraphina stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Magnus. "Was my mother's death reality, Lady Morgath? Was the slow poison that took her life after she was discovered to have the gift of song mere coincidence?" A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Several council members exchanged troubled glances, clearly hearing this accusation for the first time. Morgath's face remained impassive, but Seraphina could see the calculation behind her ancient eyes, weighing responses, seeking advantage. "Your mother was weak," Morgath said finally, her voice cold as winter frost. "The wasting sickness took her, as it has taken many Omegas throughout our history." "A convenient sickness that only strikes those with certain gifts," Seraphina replied, her voice steady despite the grief and rage churning within her. "A sickness that appeared suddenly when she was discovered to be a soul singer." Morgath rose from her throne, her frail appearance belying the power she still commanded. "Enough of these wild accusations. The Omega clearly bewitches both king and council with her treasonous words." She gestured to guards stationed at the periphery of the chamber. "Remove her and place her in isolation until proper judgment can be passed." The guards hesitated, looking to Magnus for guidance. The Alpha King stood unmoving, his amber eyes fixed on Morgath with terrifying intensity. "Touch her," he said softly, "and you challenge not just your king, but the ancient laws that predate this council. By blood and song she is bound to me. An attack on her is an attack on the throne itself." Before Morgath could respond, the great doors of the chamber burst open. Orion strode in, his expression grim, followed by Marta, the head cook. In Marta's weathered hands lay a small wooden box, ornately carved with symbols few in the chamber would recognize. "Forgive the interruption," Orion announced, his voice carrying no trace of apology, "but evidence has been discovered that cannot wait." Marta approached the center of the chamber, her normally subservient demeanor replaced by righteous anger. She placed the box on the stone floor before the assembled council. This was hidden in Lady Morgath's private chambers, behind a false wall only I knew existed, for I helped build it at her command 30 years ago. I was sworn to secrecy, told it contained dangerous herbs that might harm the pack if mishandled. With trembling hands she opened the box. Inside lay a small silver flute, its surface etched with ancient runes, and beside it a leather-bound journal. These belonged to Elara, mother of Seraphina. They were taken from her chambers the night she first fell ill with the wasting sickness that would eventually claim her life. Seraphina stepped forward, her heart constricting at the sight of these relics of her mother. She lifted the journal with reverent hands, opening it to find pages filled with her mother's familiar script. "Songs," she whispered, "ancient songs of healing, of binding, of truth." She turned the pages until she reached an entry dated just days before her mother's illness began. The words there made her blood run cold. "Lady Morgath visited today," she read aloud, her voice carrying in the silent chamber. "She has discovered my heritage, my gift. She offered me a choice, silence or death. I cannot abandon the old ways, cannot deny what I am. For my daughter's sake, I have pretended to acquiesce, but I have recorded all I know in this journal. If I should not survive what is to come, may this knowledge find its way to another singer, that the truth might live on." Seraphina looked up from the journal, her amber eyes blazing with grief and fury. "You murdered her," she said, her accusation directed at Morgath. "You poisoned her slowly, making it appear natural when her only crime was possessing a gift you feared." The chamber erupted into chaos, council members rising from their thrones, voices raised in shock and accusation. Through the tumult, Morgath remained eerily calm, her ancient eyes fixed on Seraphina with cold calculation. "Your mother was a threat to pack stability," she said when the noise had subsided somewhat. "As you are now. The Soul Singers were eliminated centuries ago for good reason. Their power, answerable to none, their ability to influence alphas a danger to proper hierarchy." "You mean a danger to council control," Magnus countered. "The true history has been preserved in the oldest texts. Soul Singers were vital to pack balance, their gifts a counterweight to alpha dominance. They were eliminated not for the good of the pack, but for the consolidation of council power." Morgath's thin lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. "Power," she echoed. "You speak as if it is something dirty, something to be ashamed of. Power is the only reality, Magnus Ravenclaw. For 7 generations, your line has provided the muscle, the face of leadership, while the true governance has rested with the council. A perfect arrangement, until this Omega turned your head with her songs." She turned to address the full council, her voice strengthening with conviction. "We have maintained peace for centuries. We have balanced the territories, prevented the extinction that endless alpha wars would have brought. Yes, we controlled the Ravenclaw alphas. Yes, we eliminated threats to our governance, all for the greater good, for the survival of our kind." "At what cost?" Magnus demanded. "A fractured alpha, half mad with rage, gifted omegas murdered or silenced, ancient knowledge suppressed. You call that peace?" "I call it necessity," Morgath replied coldly. "The old ways were chaotic, violent. The first alpha nearly destroyed us all with his uncontrolled power. We brought order from that chaos. And now that order will change," Magnus declared. "The blood bond is complete. I stand before you whole for the first time in 2 centuries. The true alpha has returned, and with him, the soul singer who will restore balance to our pack." Morgath laughed, a dry sound like autumn leaves crumbling to dust. "You think it will be so easy? That centuries of carefully maintained hierarchy will crumble because you found your voice, and the Omega has found hers?" She gestured to the council members who had remained seated, loyal to her position. "We still command the majority. We still control the pack structure. Do you?" The question came from Elder Korith, who had moved to stand with Magnus and Seraphina. "The pack follows strength, Lady Morgath. They always have. Look at your king now. Truly look at him. He stands integrated, his power unbounded by your poisons. The old texts speak of such alphas, of their unmatched strength when paired with a true soul singer." As if to emphasize his point, a commotion sounded from outside the chamber. The doors burst open once more, admitting a bloodied warrior whose armor bore the insignia of the border guard. "My king!" he gasped, dropping to one knee before Magnus. "The Bloodfang pack crosses our borders in force. Their alpha, Lord Fenris, leads them personally. They will reach the outer settlements by nightfall." Magnus's expression hardened. "How many?" "At least 200 warriors, my king. They fly the red banner of extinction. They come not to claim territory, but to eliminate our bloodline entirely." A ripple of fear passed through the council chamber. The red banner had not been seen in the northern territories for 3 generations. It signified not mere territorial aggression, but genocidal intent, a declaration that one pack sought the complete annihilation of another. "Convenient timing," Magnus observed, his gaze returning to Morgath. Through their bond, Seraphina felt his suspicion crystallize into certainty. The Bloodfang would not dare move against us without assurance of our weakness. Someone has been communicating with them, informing them of internal division. Morgath's expression remained impassive, but several of the council members shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet their king's penetrating gaze. "The threat from the north demands unity," she declared, attempting to seize control of the situation. "We can address these internal matters after the Bloodfang are repelled. For now, I propose a temporary truce. The king will lead our warriors, while the council manages internal affairs." "No," Magnus replied simply. "There will be no more division of power. I will lead our pack against the Bloodfang, but I will do so as a true alpha, with my soul singer at my side. The council will support our efforts or be replaced." Morgath's ancient face contorted with rage. "You dare threaten the sacred council?" "I dare to reclaim my birthright," Magnus countered. "I dare to restore the balance that you and your predecessors destroyed. I dare to be what I was born to be, not what you have poisoned me into becoming." He turned to address the full council, his voice resonating with the authority of 2 centuries of rule. "The time for secrets and manipulation has ended. We face an existential threat from the Bloodfang. I call upon each of you now to declare your loyalty, not to me as an individual, but to the true leadership of this pack, to the ancient balance of Alpha, Beta, and Omega that sustained our kind for millennia before council ambition corrupted it." One by one, the council members rose from their thrones. Most moved to stand behind Magnus and Seraphina, including Korith and the 2 elders who had already shown their support. Only 3 remained with Morgath, their faces tight with fear or fanatical loyalty. "So falls the mighty Moonstone Council," Morgath observed, her voice bitter but resigned. "Centuries of careful governance, undone by a pretty voice and ancient superstition." "Not undone," Seraphina corrected, speaking with newfound authority. "Transformed, returned to its original purpose, to advise rather than control. There is a place for you in what comes next, Lady Morgath, if you can accept that your wisdom is valuable but not absolute." Morgath's cold eyes fixed on Seraphina with undisguised hatred. "I will never accept an Omega as my queen, especially one whose mother I personally removed as a threat to pack stability." The blatant admission of murder silenced the chamber. Morgath seemed beyond caring about concealing her actions now, her ancient pride overriding political caution. "You admit it, then," Seraphina said softly. "You killed her." "I protected the pack from her influence, as my predecessors eliminated soul singers for generations." Morgath rose, gathering what dignity remained to her. "I will not apologize for doing what was necessary, nor will I serve in a perverted hierarchy that places Omega gifts above proper authority." She turned to the 3 council members who had remained loyal to her. "Come, we will not witness this desecration of all we have preserved." As they moved toward the chamber doors, Magnus made no move to stop them. Through their bond, Seraphina felt his strategic mind at work, weighing options, calculating risks. "She will go to the Bloodfang," Seraphina murmured, her intuition feeding off his thoughts. "Yes," Magnus agreed, "and in doing so she confirms her treachery beyond doubt. Let her flee. We have more pressing concerns." He addressed the border guard who still knelt before them. "Return to your post. Tell your captain to hold position, but not engage. The Bloodfang expect to face a weakened, divided pack. Let them continue to believe that until I arrive with our full strength." As the warrior departed, Magnus turned to the remaining council members. "The time for debate has passed. We face extinction at the hands of the Bloodfang. Will you stand with your true alpha, with the old ways restored?" Elder Korith spoke for them all, his weathered face solemn with purpose. "We stand with you, my king, and with your queen, as it was in the beginning." The word queen sent a ripple of reaction through the chamber. It was one thing for Magnus to claim Seraphina as his mate through the blood bond. It was another entirely to elevate an Omega to the highest position in the pack hierarchy. Yet none voiced objection, whether from conviction or pragmatism in the face of external threat. "Prepare our warriors," Magnus commanded. "We meet the Bloodfang before they reach our settlements. Orion will coordinate the defense of the castle should we fail." He placed a hand on Seraphina's shoulder. "My queen and I must prepare as well. The coming battle will test not just our strength, but the power of our bond." As the council members dispersed to carry out his orders, Seraphina felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders. Yesterday she had been a kitchen girl, invisible and powerless. Today she stood as queen, her gift acknowledged, her voice heard. The cost had been high, the truth about her mother's murder reopening wounds she had thought long scarred over. Yet through the pain came purpose. Through grief came resolve. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Magnus asked when they were alone in the chamber. The question an echo of what he had asked in the sacred grove. Seraphina reached for the silver flute that had belonged to her mother, running her fingers over the ancient runes carved into its surface. "I will be," she promised, both to him and to herself. "For my mother, for our pack, for the balance that was lost and must be restored." Magnus nodded, understanding in his amber eyes. "Then let us prepare for war." The great hall of Ironwood Castle transformed into a war room as the day progressed. Maps covered the ancient oak tables, weighted down with stone markers representing troop positions. Warriors in battle armor moved with purpose, checking weapons, receiving orders, preparing for the conflict to come. The atmosphere hummed with tension and determination, the pack unified by external threat in a way internal politics had never achieved. Seraphina moved through it all at Magnus's side, her presence initially drawing curious glances that gradually gave way to respectful nods. The story of the blood bond had spread throughout the castle, along with rumors of her gift, her heritage, and the council's treachery. She could feel attitudes shifting, centuries of ingrained hierarchy beginning to crack in the face of ancient magic reborn. "The Bloodfang will reach Widow's Pass by sundown," reported Captain Thorne, a grizzled veteran whose loyalty to the throne had never wavered despite council pressure. "It's the natural choke point. We can meet them there with advantage of position." Magnus studied the map, his tactician's mind assessing possibilities. "Fenris will expect that. He's fought in these territories before. We need something unexpected." He looked up, his amber eyes meeting Seraphina's. "Something he cannot prepare for." Understanding passed between them through the bond. Seraphina nodded, her hand closing around the silver flute she now carried at her waist. "The Song of Unity," she said. "From my mother's grimoire, it would allow me to connect not just with you, but with all our warriors simultaneously." Captain Thorne frowned, old prejudices warring with practical necessity. "With respect, my king, battle is no place for an Omega, regardless of her gifts. The fighting will be brutal, the risk extreme." "The risk is necessary," Magnus replied firmly. "The Bloodfang outnumber us. They come with genocidal intent. Conventional tactics will result in heavy losses at best, extinction at worst. We need every advantage, including those the council sought to suppress for centuries." He turned to Seraphina, his expression grave. "But the captain speaks truth about the danger. The Song of Unity will place you at the heart of the battle, vulnerable while you maintain the connection. I cannot guarantee your safety." Seraphina lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My mother died because she was isolated, because her gift was seen as threatening rather than vital. I will not make the same mistake. My place is with the pack, using what I am to protect what we all hold dear." Magnus nodded, pride evident in his eyes and through their bond. "Then we go together, to victory or to death." The army assembled in the great courtyard as afternoon waned toward evening, 300 warriors representing the fighting strength of the northern territories. They were fewer than the Bloodfang force, but each was a veteran of border skirmishes, each loyal to the Ravenclaw throne despite council interference. They mounted massive ironwood steeds, horses bred for generations to carry werewolf warriors, unafraid of the scent of predator or the weight of shifting riders. Seraphina sat astride her own mount beside Magnus, clothed not in the fine dress of a queen, but in leather armor crafted hastily by the castle leatherworker, designed to protect while allowing the freedom of movement her role would require. At her waist hung her mother's silver flute, and across her back was strapped the grimoire containing the ancient songs of power. She felt the stares of the warriors, some curious, some doubtful, but she kept her back straight and her gaze forward, channeling a confidence she did not entirely feel. "They will follow where we lead," Magnus said softly, sensing her uncertainty through their bond. Not because of titles or tradition, but because of strength they can see with their own eyes. As if to demonstrate his point, he shifted partially, his features taking on lupine aspects while maintaining human form, his muscles swelling with power beneath his armor. The warriors responded instinctively, many shifting partially themselves in response to their alpha's display. The courtyard filled with growls of anticipation, the sound of a pack preparing for war. "For the north!" Magnus roared, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors. "For our pack! For our future!" The answering cry shook the very stones of the castle as 300 voices joined as one. Magnus wheeled his mount toward the gates, and the army followed, thundering across the drawbridge and into the forest beyond, following ancient paths known only to the northern pack. They rode hard through the afternoon, the great ironwood trees blurring past as they pushed their mounts to the limits of endurance. Magnus led them not toward Widow's Pass where the Bloodfang would expect resistance, but along hidden trails that curved around to approach from an unexpected angle. It was a risky strategy, sacrificing the defensive advantage of the pass for the element of surprise, but as Seraphina felt through their bond, it was their best chance against superior numbers. Twilight was falling when they reached the position Magnus had selected, a ridgeline overlooking a broad valley where the Bloodfang would have to pass on their way to the northern settlements. The warriors dismounted, forming into battle groups with practiced efficiency. Magnus called the captains together for final instructions, while Seraphina prepared herself for what was to come. Finding a quiet spot among the trees, she opened her mother's grimoire to the page containing the Song of Unity. The ancient notation was complex, designed for both voice and flute, with symbols indicating how the song would connect with lupine consciousness. She traced the patterns with her fingers, committing them to memory, feeling an instinctive understanding that went beyond mere learning. "Your mother would be proud," said a voice behind her. Seraphina turned to find Orion approaching, his weathered face solemn in the fading light. He had insisted on accompanying them despite his age, refusing to remain at the castle as Magnus had initially ordered. "You knew her," Seraphina said, the realization dawning. "That's why you recognized what I was immediately." Orion nodded, settling beside her on a fallen log. "I knew her well. She was a remarkable woman, your mother. Even with her gift suppressed by council decree, she had a way of bringing harmony to those around her." "You were friends?" A shadow passed over Orion's face. "More than friends, for a time, before she met your father." The implications of this statement took a moment to register. "You and my mother were—" "We found comfort in each other's company," Orion said simply. "I was already old, already Magnus's beta. But your mother saw past position and age to the soul beneath. She had that gift, even separate from her singing." Seraphina studied his face, seeing it with new eyes. "You loved her." "As much as I have ever loved anyone," Orion admitted. "When she chose your father, I respected her decision. When she died, I suspected foul play, but could prove nothing. The council was too powerful, too entrenched." "And my father?" Seraphina asked, the question she had carried her entire life finally finding voice. "Who was he?" Orion's blue eyes met hers directly. "A warrior from the Eastern Territories, here on diplomatic business. Strong, honorable, with a bloodline that traced back to the second Great Alpha. He returned to his pack before your birth, never knowing he had fathered a child. Morgath saw to that, intercepting messages, ensuring he believed your mother had chosen another." The revelation settled in Seraphina's heart, not filling the hole left by her father's absence, but at least giving it shape and reason. "Is he still alive?" "No," Orion replied gently. "He fell in territorial disputes 10 years ago, but his bloodline continues through you, stronger perhaps than even Morgath realized when she sought to label you defective." A horn sounded in the distance, cutting their conversation short. The Bloodfang approached, their advance guard visible now in the valley below. torches moving through the gathering darkness like malevolent fireflies. "It's time," Orion said, rising with the fluid grace that belied his years. "Whatever happens next, know that your mother's spirit lives on in what you do today." Seraphina returned to Magnus's side as the Bloodfang forces began to fill the valley below. Their numbers were impressive, warriors in partial shift moving with predatory grace, their armor gleaming dully in the torchlight. At their head rode a massive figure whose very presence seemed to distort the air around him, a power so malevolent it was almost visible. "Fenris Bloodfang," Magnus identified the leader, his voice tight with controlled rage, responsible for the slaughter of 3 minor packs in the last decade. "He seeks to absorb our territory, to claim the ancient power of the Ironwood for himself." Through their bond, Seraphina sensed something Magnus wasn't saying aloud. "You've faced him before," she intuited. Magnus nodded grimly. 50 years ago, at the Battle of Broken Claw. I was already affected by the Council's poison, my control tenuous at best. Fenris used that against me, nearly cost us the eastern boundaries. He knows the effects of the treatment, knows how to exploit the rage. "But you're different now," Seraphina reminded him. "Whole, integrated, and not alone." Magnus's amber eyes met hers, gratitude flowing through their bond. "No, not alone. Never again." He addressed his assembled captains. "We attack on my signal. Remember the plan. Strike hard, strike fast. Make them believe our full force is committed, then fall back to draw them into position for the true assault." The captains nodded, moving to relay orders to their warriors. Magnus turned back to Seraphina, his expression solemn. "The moment will come when all seems lost. That is when your song must rise. Are you ready?" Seraphina removed the silver flute from her belt, feeling its weight, the connection to her mother, to a lineage of soul singers reaching back to the first pack. "I am ready," she affirmed, both to Magnus and to herself. Magnus kissed her then, brief but fierce, before shifting fully into his massive wolf form. He threw back his head and howled, the sound echoing across the valley, a challenge and a declaration of war. 300 northern warriors responded, their voices joining his in a chorus that shook the very earth. The battle began in earnest as northern warriors poured down the ridgeline, taking the Bloodfang by surprise. The initial assault was devastating, dozens of enemy warriors falling to the unexpected attack. Fenris bellowed orders, rallying his forces, his massive frame shifting partially as he waded into the fight. Seraphina watched from the ridgeline, protected by a small guard detail, as the northern forces executed Magnus's strategy. They struck hard, inflicted maximum damage, then began a controlled retreat, drawing the Bloodfang deeper into the valley where the terrain would constrain their superior numbers. Through the bond, she felt Magnus's fierce concentration, his strategic mind calculating each move, directing his forces with precision, even in the chaos of battle. She also felt the moment when the tide began to turn, when Bloodfang reinforcements arrived and their numerical advantage began to tell. Northern warriors fought valiantly, but they were being pushed back, surrounded, cut off from support. "Now," she whispered to herself, "now is the time." Raising the silver flute to her lips, Seraphina began to play the Song of Unity. The melody was unlike anything she had produced before, notes that seemed to bypass the ear and speak directly to the soul. She felt the power building within her, radiating outward, seeking connection with the wolves below. One by one, the northern warriors straightened as the song reached them, their movements becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. Through the music, Seraphina established links between them, creating a network of awareness that transcended normal pack bonds. Each warrior could sense the others, could anticipate movements, could fight as part of a single organism rather than as individuals. The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. The northern forces moved with uncanny synchronization, flanking, supporting, protecting each other with perfect efficiency. The Bloodfang, fighting as individuals despite their pack bonds, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. At the center of it all was Magnus, his massive wolf form a blur of midnight fur and flashing fangs. Through their blood bond, amplified by the Song of Unity, Seraphina channeled her strength into him, allowing him to fight beyond normal endurance, to sense attacks before they came, to strike with unerring precision. Fenris recognized the source of the change, his baleful gaze fixing on Seraphina where she stood on the ridgeline. With a roar of fury, he broke away from the main battle, charging toward her with several of his elite guards. Seraphina's own guards moved to intercept, but they were few against the Bloodfang Alpha's tremendous power. Seraphina continued to play, pouring all her concentration into maintaining the Song of Unity, even as danger approached. Through the bond, she felt Magnus's desperate concern, felt him fighting to reach her, held back by the press of enemies between them. The first of her guards fell to Fenris's claws, the second moments later. The Bloodfang Alpha loomed before her, his partially shifted form a grotesque blend of human and wolf, his eyes burning with hatred and fear. "Soul Singer!" he spat, the words distorted by his elongated muzzle. "Your kind should have died out centuries ago." Seraphina lowered the flute, the Song of Unity temporarily suspended. She felt the network of connections weakening, but not breaking entirely, sustained by the initial power of the bond. She faced Fenris without flinching, drawing on a courage she had not known she possessed. "My kind never died," she replied. "We were silenced, suppressed, murdered, but the gift remained, waiting for the moment to return." Fenris snarled, taking a menacing step toward her. "Morgath promised me your head, promised me a weakened alpha, a pack divided against itself. Instead, I find this abomination of old magic." "Morgath's time is over," Seraphina declared, "as is yours, Lord Bloodfang. You fight against nature itself, against the balance that sustained our kind for millennia." "I fight for power," Fenris growled, "for dominance. The old ways were weak, giving voice to Omegas, treating them as equals when they should serve." Seraphina raised the flute again, but not to her lips. She held it before her like a talisman. "You are wrong, and you have already lost." Before Fenris could strike, a massive black form crashed into him from the side. Magnus, his wolf form somehow even larger than before, radiated power that was almost visible in the gathering darkness. The two alphas rolled down the slope, locked in mortal combat, claws rending, jaws snapping for killing blows. Seraphina resumed the Song of Unity, focusing now on Magnus alone, channeling all her strength, all her gift, into supporting his fight. Through their bond, she felt his determination, his rage, not at the poison that had weakened him for centuries, at the murder of her mother, at the corruption that had twisted pack hierarchy into a tool of control. The battling alphas separated, circling each other with predatory focus. Fenris was larger, his frame bulked by decades of unchallenged dominance, but Magnus moved with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect integration between human strategic mind and lupine physical power. Fenris charged, using his superior weight to drive Magnus backward. The Ravenclaw Alpha allowed the momentum to carry them both, rolling at the last moment to use Fenris's own mass against him. As they tumbled down the slope, Magnus's jaws found Fenris's throat, clamping down with terrible purpose. The Bloodfang Alpha thrashed, his massive claws raking Magnus's sides, drawing blood that gleamed black in the moonlight. But Magnus held firm, his jaws tightening inexorably. Through their bond, Seraphina felt his resolve, his absolute certainty that this enemy must be eliminated for the pack to survive. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Fenris broke free, staggering backward, blood pouring from his throat. He attempted to shift back to human form, perhaps hoping to speak, to bargain, but the wound was too severe. He collapsed, his body convulsing as the life drained from him. Magnus stood over his fallen enemy, his muzzle stained with blood, his amber eyes gleaming with the knowledge of victory. He threw back his head and howled, the sound carrying across the valley where the battle still raged. The northern warriors responded, their voices joining his in triumph, while the Bloodfang forces faltered, feeling the death of their alpha through their pack bonds. With their leader gone and the northern forces fighting with uncanny coordination thanks to the Song of Unity, the Bloodfang began to retreat. Some threw down their weapons in surrender, while others fled into the forest, all semblance of pack structure dissolving in the wake of Fenris's death. Seraphina lowered the flute, exhaustion washing over her as the power of the song ebbed. Magnus climbed the slope toward her, shifting back to human form as he approached. Blood from multiple wounds stained his torn armor, but his amber eyes shone with fierce joy. "It is done," he said simply, gathering her into his arms. "The Bloodfang are defeated. The northern territories are secure." Through their bond, Seraphina felt his triumph, his relief, but also a deep weariness that matched her own. They had won the battle, but the larger war for the future of their pack had only just begun. "Not quite done," came a voice from the shadows. Morgath stepped into the moonlight, her ancient frame somehow menacing despite her apparent frailty. In her withered hands, she held a crossbow, its bolt aimed directly at Seraphina's heart. "Did you think I would flee with the Bloodfang rabble? That I would abandon centuries of careful governance to your perversion of the natural order?" Magnus pushed Seraphina behind him, shielding her with his body. "It's over, Morgath. Your ally is dead. Your council is disbanded. Your poison no longer flows in my veins. There is nowhere left for you to run." "I do not run," Morgath replied, her voice steady despite the defeat surrounding her. "I stand for order, for control, for the hierarchy that has preserved our kind through countless threats. The Soul Singers were eliminated for a reason, Magnus Ravenclaw. Their power answers to none, corrupts even the strongest alpha with notions of equality and balance, when dominance is the only true law." "You're wrong," Seraphina said, stepping out from behind Magnus despite his protective instinct. "The old texts speak truth. Alpha, Beta, Omega, each with their role, their strength. Balance, not dominance. That is what preserved our kind, until ambition twisted it." "Pretty words from an aberration, who should have been eliminated with her mother," Morgath spat. The crossbow never wavered in her ancient hands. "I will not live to see the world you would create, but neither shall you. The Bloodfang may return, the council may reform, and order will be restored." She fired, the crossbow bolt speeding toward Seraphina with deadly accuracy. Time seemed to slow as multiple reactions occurred simultaneously. Magnus moved to intercept, his body shifting partially in desperate speed. Orion, appearing from nowhere, lunged toward Morgath with a cry of rage, and Seraphina, acting on instinct rather than thought, raised the silver flute to her lips and played a single, piercing note. The bolt stopped in midair, suspended as if frozen in time, inches from Magnus's chest. The note Seraphina played seemed to vibrate through reality itself, bending natural law through the power of ancient magic. Morgath's eyes widened in shock and fear, her ancient face contorting with the realization that she faced something beyond her understanding or control. "Impossible," she whispered. "No singer has ever possessed such power. No singer has ever been bonded to a true alpha," Seraphina replied, lowering the flute. The bolt clattered harmlessly to the ground. "The old magic grows stronger when balance is restored, when the pieces are united rather than divided." Orion had reached Morgath, disarming her with ease despite her struggles. The ancient healer sagged in his grip, her strength finally failing after centuries of life sustained by herbs and dark magic. "What will you do with me?" she demanded, her pride undiminished even in defeat. "Execute me for defending the order that has preserved our kind?" Magnus approached her, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Death would be too merciful, too quick for the harm you have caused, for the murder of Elara, for the poisoning of 7 generations of my line, for betraying our pack to the Bloodfang." "Exile," Seraphina suggested, the word rising from a place of wisdom rather than vengeance. "Strip her of rank, of pack connection, of all she has valued. Let her live out her days alone, without the power she has wielded for so long." Morgath's face contorted with something like fear for the first time. "You would sever me from the pack bond? Leave me to die alone without connection?" "As you left my mother to die," Seraphina replied, her voice steady despite the grief that still lingered. "As you would have left me. Justice, not vengeance." Magnus nodded, his decision made. "Exile, then. Beyond our borders, beyond all pact territories, alone with the memory of your crimes." Morgath seemed to age decades in moments, her ancient frame crumpling as the full weight of her sentence settled upon her. Orion led her away, her once proud head bowed in final defeat. As the moon reached its zenith over the valley where the battle had been fought and won, Magnus turned to Seraphina, taking her hands in his. Around them, warriors gathered, their faces solemn with the recognition that they witnessed a historic moment, the beginning of a new era. "The Soul Singer has returned to the Northern Territories," Magnus declared, his voice carrying to all assembled. "The balance is restored. Alpha, Beta, Omega, each with their role, their strength, their voice. This is the foundation upon which we will build our future." He raised Seraphina's hand, pressing it to his heart, where their blood bond pulsed with shared strength. "My queen, not by tradition or decree, but by the oldest magic, by the laws that predate councils and politics, we rule together, or not at all." The warriors knelt as one, their submission not the cowering of the weak before the strong, but the acknowledgement of right leadership, of natural order restored. The howl that rose from 300 throats was not a battle cry, but a celebration, a pack finding its voice after centuries of enforced silence. As spring bloomed across the Northern Territories, transforming the ironwood forest into a tapestry of green and gold, Seraphina stood on the balcony of the royal chamber, her gaze turned toward the distant mountains. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Bloodfang Valley, 6 months of healing, rebuilding, rediscovering ancient ways long suppressed by council decree. The pack was transforming, hierarchy shifting from rigid dominance to balanced strength. Omegas found their voices, their gifts acknowledged and cultivated rather than feared. Alphas learned to lead through respect rather than intimidation. Betas discovered their role as connectors, bridges between the different segments of pack society. Not all accepted the changes willingly. Some elders clung to old prejudices, some warriors to outdated notions of strength. But with each passing moon, resistance weakened, as the benefits of balance became apparent in every aspect of pack life. The door opened behind her, and Magnus entered, carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft furs. His silver-streaked hair hung loose around features that had softened somewhat in the months of peace, though the power in his amber eyes remained undiminished. "She finally sleeps," he said, his deep voice gentle as he joined Seraphina on the balcony. In his massive arms, the infant looked impossibly tiny, her dark hair a stark contrast to the pale fur that swaddled her. Seraphina smiled, reaching out to brush a finger along the baby's perfect cheek. "Luna dreams of running through moonlit forests," she said, sensing the child's thoughts through a bond different from, but no less powerful than the one she shared with Magnus. Luna was not their biological child, impossible given Seraphina's supposed defect, though they had discovered over time that this too had been a council lie, one more attempt to control bloodlines and prevent the birth of soul singers. The infant had been orphaned during the battle, her parents fallen defending a northern settlement from Bloodfang raiders. In adopting her, Magnus and Seraphina had made a statement about the nature of pack, of family, that transcended biology and tradition. "The delegates from the Eastern Territories arrive tomorrow," Magnus said, his gaze joining hers in contemplating the distant mountains. "They bring word that changes similar to ours have begun in their pack. It seems the old ways call to more than just the North." "Balance seeks itself," Seraphina replied, the wisdom flowing through her from a source older than conscious thought. "Like water finding its level, we have only removed the dam that held it back." Magnus shifted Luna to one arm, using the other to draw Seraphina against his side. The council feared this, feared the return of true balance. They knew it would mean the end of their control, and the beginning of something older and truer. Seraphina rested her head against his shoulder, their bond humming with shared contentment. My mother would be proud, I think, to see what her sacrifice ultimately achieved. She would be proud of you, Magnus corrected gently, of the queen you have become, of the changes you have helped bring about. In the nursery they had prepared for Luna. A silver flute rested in a place of honor, alongside a grimoire whose pages had been supplemented with Seraphina's own discoveries. The legacy of the soul singers lived on, not just through her, but through the young Omegas now being trained to recognize and develop their gifts rather than suppress them. As twilight descended over Ironwood Castle, Seraphina began to sing, a lullaby for the sleeping child, for the mate at her side, for the pack that looked to them for guidance. The melody carried on the evening breeze, touching the hearts of all who heard it, a reminder of the balance restored, the harmony regained, the broken crown made whole once more.